welcome. This is a great group. We are so pleased you're here, and I imagine people will be coming in as the evening progresses, and we will make room for them as we can. Everybody is totally welcome to be here. My name is Carter Hayward. I'm one of the vice presidents of the local chapter of the NAACP. I'm also, along with Robert Kilgore over here, one of the chairs of the Religious Affairs Committee, which is sponsoring this event tonight. And this event is to have three of our sisters and brothers here talk to us tonight about growing up black in Transylvania County. We see this as something of a pilot project. We hope to do more of these, maybe with young people, maybe with racially mixed groups about being white, black, brown, whatever, to try to really get some dialogue going in this community about ways that we are different and ways that the commonalities that we share. So we see this as a program to spring into that kind of ongoing discussion.
Okay, thank you all. To open a discussion and dialogue of this nature is really fascinating. To get feedback and comments on pretty much how life was, how the existence was, and let's be open and say that we all experienced it from one side of the aisle or the other. As such, it created a growing experience and a learning experience that we all, in one way or another, find ourselves today still in the midst of, with current events sometimes rewind the tape and take us back to a time where we had to seek progress. We had to seek racial equity. We had to seek for civil rights. So bringing that into perspective, you will get some comments, some views on how life was and how life is in Brevard and Transylvania County from those of us who lived it. I think in the scheme, I'll let each of the panelists introduce themselves. I don't know whether it's necessary for them to give you a lot of background, because you will probably find in their comments and their conversations, you will get a background. So I'll start with my brother, Robert, my older brother.
Good evening. He would have to say my older. I wish he would respect my comments that way. But I would like to thank the minister of this fine place for inviting us and allow us to have this presentation this evening. Growing up black in Transylvania County, upon growing up in Transylvania County and Brevard, particularly during the 40s and the 50s, was like, I kind of likened it to an eaglet that was being prepared to get kicked out of the nest. Because eventually that's what I feel like happened to me when I subsequently left Brevard to go to other places for more education. I was educated in the Rosenwald school system, Rosenwald Elementary School, from the 1st to the 8th grade. I entered in 1949 and left there in 1957. This was during the time of steeped segregation, when it was not even thought of. Integration wasn't much of a thought in a lot of folk minds about integration and going to the same school. But I left there in 1957, and at that time, black kids in this county had to be bused, or were being bused, didn't have to be, were being bused to Henderson County for a high school education. Fortunately, myself, I did not have to incur that because my parents saw fit to send me to Wilmington, North Carolina to attend Williston High School, which was an industrial high school. It was also a segregated school system. And I went there from the 9th through the 12th grade. It was a time that I didn't recognize segregation for segregation itself, for knowing it to be segregation. Because when you live in a certain system for so long, particularly when you are born into it and you grow into it, you don't recognize it for what it truly is. But when I became exposed upon leaving Brevard and going to larger cities and seeing where people were demonstrating to eat at lunch counters and demonstrating and trying to get the school system integrated, then I became very aware that my very little hometown, my little sanctuary right here in Brevard was very segregated, although we were protected. When we were at Rosenwald, we had teachers that looked like us. All of the students looked like us. The cooks in the kitchen looked like us. And we all felt that we were treated very fairly and equitably. Upon leaving that system, and getting outside of that, we realized that everything wasn't as it seemed. Because when you would go to Varner's drugstore and you had to stand at the end of the lunch counter to get served, you start wondering why. When we would go up to Gaither's restaurant and have to go around to the back doors for somebody to hand you a hamburger out the back door, then you wonder why. And it was through those things that gave me, I guess, the wherewithal to have the desire to change some of these things. But I did not know how, because I was too young at the time and to know what to do. And at the time, most of the adults were pretty well satisfied with the way things were. But upon going to high school, as I told you, in Wilmington, North Carolina, and participating in demonstrations and boycotts of various stores, and coming back to Brevard, it was on my heart to help change take place in this city. Subsequently, I moved to, later years, I moved to Atlanta. Jobs in Brevard for black folk just wasn't that many. I went to Olin back in the mid-'60s and was told upon giving an application and going to Olin, I was told by the gentleman that was hiring me that I had excellent qualifications, but he could not hire me to do the jobs that I was qualified for. So I had to take a janitorial position. Menial jobs back in those days was about all black folk in this county had to look forward to, even in some of the plants and the places. The only jobs that were held at Olin, this was before the DuPont era, were janitorial positions. However, a few years later, with the Civil Rights Bill being passed, I was asked to go into the electric shop, which is what I was pursuing at the time, to be an electrician. And I was one of 2 African Americans at that time that worked in the trades. And I was in the electric shop. A friend of mine, Fred Cright, was a machinist down there, and he worked in the machine shop until he retired. I left and went to Wilmington, to Georgia in later years to pursue the field that I had sought for so many years. Then on the employment side of it, and coming back, I found that in later years that that things had moved forward. But I can remember those days going into Belk's and being followed by a white storekeeper. I can remember going up to the 5 and dime, Rose's 5 and dime, and when you enter, somebody would fall in behind you and follow you around through the stores. Not because of your impending purchases, but because you were black. It was just a thing that happened. And in our early years, I don't think we realized really what was going on. I guess I probably thought, oh, they like me, they're keeping me company, following me through the store. But I found out that there was that inherent thing that had been taught among some people that don't look like us, that we might want to steal something. And it wasn't just here. Even when I went to North Carolina A&T in Greensboro, I found the same thing was going on. So it wasn't just inherent here in Brevard, but wherever I went, and if you were black, you were treated differently. Thanks be to God, some of those things have changed, and there's still room for change. And just looking across this room this evening lets me know that some changes have taken place, and we're willing to look forward and work toward other changes across the board with each of us. And that's going to come with dialogue, with conversations, with interaction with each other, and understanding more about each other. Thank you. Ms. Williams?
My name is Nancy Williams. I was born and raised here in Transylvania County. My home is still standing where I was raised. Robert and I were classmates. We're the same, no, we're not the same age.
She's the oldest.
We went to Rosenwald there. And of course, from Rosenwald, I didn't go to Hendersonville because my sisters and brothers, it was 7 of us. And my father said he didn't think his heart would take another child riding a school bus 42 miles a day to school. So I was sent to Allen Home High School in Asheville, which was a boarding Methodist school. And of course, I went there, and the teachers there were basically white teachers. It was black and white, and it was an all-girls school. Except for my senior year, there were 4 boys that attended from Burnsville, North Carolina, because they were integrating the schools out there, trying to, in Burnsville. And the boys, they let the boys come to Allen as day students from Burnsville so that they could graduate. They were seniors. It was only 4 seniors. And of course, that was the year that I think they all integrated over in Burnsville after that. And growing up here in Brevard, I didn't see that much difference than growing up anywhere else because I'd always been around white people all my life. My father, he worked for Carl McQuarrie for years. And they considered us, I thought, as family. And of course, after so many years, you learn that there is a difference in looks, but not in ways and actions. I mean, they always treated me and my family like we were human, just like them. They'd come to my house, my mother and father's house, and eat. They'd take us, Miss Mary Jane would have us out to her house, and things that I really wanted to do, they would help my father see that I got to do it. So I can't say that there was a great difference, but except for being in you know, going in the movie, we had to go to the side movie, and the principal of the Rosenwald School took up tickets for the black people to go upstairs and go to the Clemson. Clemson Theater. And that's when we went to the movie, and then they had a little drug corner stand down right by the movie. And we go on the side there and get our popcorn or whatever to carry up with us. We could not go in the front door. There were places that we couldn't use the bathroom, you know. As a child, when my mother would take me shopping, if I had to go to the bathroom, she'd say, wait until you get home. Well, that was one of the things we had to do. You either wait or find somewhere that would let you use it, you know. Trying on clothes, that wasn't, that was a big thing if you got to try on something in a store at the time. We had Trantham Shoe Store, which was down on the corner of Main Street. And that's where I would always get my shoes from. And of course, after he would measure my foot with a board, he would go get the size shoes he thought I needed. When I went to Allen, it wasn't quite as bad because we had to go anywhere that we went in Allen, we had to have a chaperone. One of the teachers would take us downtown shopping or whatever. But you still had to be careful of what you did, what you touched, for two reasons. In order to stay at the school and to say that you weren't taking something, you know, it's that type of thing. And of course, we went to black churches. The only white church we went to was, no, that church was black too. Berry Temple
Berry
Church.
Temple AME.
Berry Temple was the Methodist church for the school, and it was black too. So they didn't take us to white churches, it was the black churches, and we always had to walk when we went to church, whether it was Eagle Street or over on Hildebrand, anywhere we went, we had to walk. And of course, when I came back home in the later years, I left here and went to New York. And then when I came back home, of course, my kids were all in school here, and schools were integrated. There was a difference that I could see that they had an opportunity that I didn't have. My oldest daughter, I think she was the second black homecoming queen they had. My second daughter was. And of course, now that all my children are grown, they played in sports, they were recognized in sports and all, but there are children, you know, still coming up that's not being recognized because they are something like pushed back for some reason or another. And I feel like that any child that is trying and is doing the smallest thing, they should be recognized. That helps a lot in the community and with the young people too.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to take you back to bring you forward. The year was May 17, 1954. 3 attorneys, Thurgood Marshall, James Newbern, and George E.C. Hayes, sued the Arkansas School District, Brown versus the Board of Education. mandate came down from the Supreme Court to desegregate all public schools in the United States, the lower 48 states. Even though this mandate came down from the federal courts, it was basically ignored. From 1954 to 1962, it was ignored by the state of North Carolina. It was ignored by all the southern states. So every school district throughout the South, all of the 100 counties in the state of North Carolina had to individually sue the state and sue their school districts. In 1962 in Transylvania County, an organization was formed called the TCIO, the Transylvania Citizens Improvement Organization. These were some of our parents right here joined the TCIO. The TCIO hired a young black lawyer, the first black lawyer in the city of Asheville and Buncombe County and Western North Carolina, Reuben J. Daly. Reuben J. Daly went to the Western District of the federal courts and sued. The first county that he sued was Transylvania County. He sued a total of 8 counties. He filed a lawsuit against 8 western counties, but the first one was Transylvania County. When the case was won in 1962, the judge mandated that 40 black students were to be integrated into the school system. 8 went in. 8 went in. The superintendent of public schools says, we don't have space, we don't have books, we don't have transportation. So the first 8 that left Rosenwald were handpicked by the teachers at Rosenwald because they wanted to make a good impression. They wanted to send the best and the brightest. Now, at that particular time, some did transfer from Hendersonville to the high school, but they said the high school was not completed yet. The first high school was on the corner of Oakdale and South Broad Street, a 3-story brick building with a log cabin lunchroom next door to it. Where the Transylvania County Library sits now was our athletic field. It was the main football field and baseball, everything, all athletics were held there on that particular field. I was in the second class to go in. Now, I didn't, as both my brother and Nancy stated, we didn't know, and I didn't realize growing up from 1st to the 8th grade really what segregation was. Because the Rosenwald district was an entity unto itself. We were educated, we were tutored, we were cultured, as it were, all within the framework of that 5 square block area on West Main Street. And we didn't really know until, like you said, we stepped out into the real world. I didn't realize when my folks went to the courthouse, what the sign colored meant. Why did this say colored and this say white? Why did the sign at the depot, one that said colored and one said white? I wasn't aware of why there were 2 water fountains in front of the courthouse. You know, one a nice rock fountain and the other a faucet. I didn't know until my dad said, "No, you drink out of that one. You know, you don't drink out of that one." So as my brother said, you know, it was an evolution of understanding, and as we became enlightened, and I won't repeat some of the same things that he encountered because there were some of the same things that he encountered, but one moment in my life stands out as a child. We were taught American history at Rosenwald. And this was as I stated in a commentary earlier, our particular class, there was no big hoopla, there was no fanfare. Mr. Duncan, our teacher, stood up in the 8th grade class one day and said, next school year, you will be going to Brevard Junior High School. That's how we were introduced to integration. There was no explanation. There was no letters. Our parents had already been notified that you will be going to Brevard Junior High School the next year. At the same time, voter registration was going on. Voter registration was taking place. And we had learned some things. I went to the courthouse with my parents, my mother, my father, my uncle Rockefeller, and my Aunt Mary. When we went into the registrar's office, the registrar asked my parents some questions. Do you know who the president is? Do you know who the vice president is? How many jelly beans are in a 1-quart jar? Do you know who the governor is? Do you know the preamble to the Constitution? And my father said, Tommy? I said, yes, sir. And this is a true story. He said, what is the preamble to the Constitution? And I said, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty, to ourselves and our posterity do ordain and establish the Constitution of the United States of America. Because they had taught me that at Rosenwald. There was a man standing next to my folks, and so the clerk basically just kind of, she just nodded, okay. But what struck me in leaving, I observed a gentleman standing there, and he was filling out his paperwork, and they turned, and of course, as a child in those days, until you were told to speak, you did not speak unless you were told to speak. But I asked my father, I said, the clerk turned the piece of paper, put it toward the man. She wrote something which I found out later was his name, and next to his name, he put an X. And I asked my father, in leaving, I said, Daddy, why did that man put that mark beside, not referring to it as an X? And he said, well, son, he probably couldn't read, but he could vote. I could read, my father could read, my mother could read, my uncle could read. My aunt was a school teacher. She was one of the first librarians here in the county, Mary Kilgore. But he could vote. So the wheels started turning. The wheels started turning. So my sophomore year in high school, my folks had got a TV. And we knew where to go and where not to go. We know where to be at certain times of day, and we knew where not to be at certain times of day. It was ingrained into the fabric of the culture. You just knew these things. My mother was a domestic. She worked for the same family for 54 years. My father was a carpenter, but he could never get a job as a carpenter until they built the fish hatchery. And the federal government mandated that a certain number of minorities had to be hired to work on a federal project. So for 2 years, my father got to apply his trade. He helped build the fish hatchery, the Cradle of Forestry, the visitor center. My father worked on all those projects. But within the culture, he could only be a laborer. He could not practice his trade. He could not stand beside a white man and nail a nail and make the same amount of money as his counterparts did. But I observed in my sophomore year, my folks got a TV, which may or may not have been a good thing. And we watched the rest of the world. And at our high school, they had pep rallies every Friday in the auditorium. And at the beginning of every pep rally, Dixie was played. The beginning of every Dixie was played before the national anthem. Dixie, then the national anthem. At the ball games, Dixie, and then the national anthem. Well, and my brother probably recalls this, I had observed a group in Los Angeles, California called the Black Panthers. And I said, wow, you know. It didn't take much to influence me. So at one pep rally, I politely stood up and I was politely escorted out of the pep rally. And my mother was called, and my brother can probably elaborate on that. Well, we got to go out here and see what your brother did. So I was suspended for 3 days. I only got a 3-day suspension, but that started my mental wheels turning and understanding kind of what was going on in society and how it affected me and influenced me. Now, we went on to post-graduation. We had the middle road during the 60s for the thing that brought both sides at least to a middle ground was athletics. The black kids excelled in athletics. So we carried our first title, our first state football team, the first integrated football team in the state of North Carolina, got a title his first year. I was in track and field, but I had to train at the college because they didn't have facilities at the high school. So, but we also had those who excelled academically. Many went on to Dorothy Hill, classmate of mine who is now deceased, was one of the first blacks at Clemson University. Carl Mooney, Jr., North Carolina A&T, and on. Linda Gash Lott, North Carolina A&T. Charles Hunt, North Carolina Central, and on and on and on. So we saw changes. We saw a movement within the community by black folks within the community to encourage academic excellence, athletic excellence, and a willingness to integrate. But I would say that in all of this, and I have stated this before, there was an underlying or that we were always tolerated but never accepted. Now, I, for one reason or another, didn't really strive for acceptance. I really didn't care. But I know that socially there was an undertow of tolerance. When I went on to pursue my education and career in California, I had families that were involved in the movement. And so it stimulated me and kept my interests going. Many members of my family were involved in the civil rights movement. My uncle, Dr. Thomas Kilgore Jr., was one of the participants in the March on Washington. He and Martin Luther King graduated from Morehouse College the same year and went on to establish the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So we were encouraged as a family to not so much carry the torch, but understand why it's necessary to stay at the forefront of equality. And one other thing I noted, and I heard this from Martin Luther King himself in talking, he said he didn't get in trouble with the system until he started addressing political equity, social equity among all people. When he mentioned the poverty in Appalachia and in lower Mississippi and in Alabama, and stated that the only difference in the poverty was the color, because there was as many poor white folks as there were black folks, he said he got himself in trouble. And it took me a while to really identify with that and study that, because I was in the black power mode. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. You know, I went through that phase. But later on, I found that moving forward and bringing me to where I am today, back in Brevard after 21 years, I stayed in California 21 years, and moving back here, I found that some of the same challenges exist, but they exist for a different reason now. They're all, things are motivated by politics. So racial justice and racial equity and voter rights and all of these things now take on they really don't take on a mantle of color. They take on a mantle of need. And they take on the mantle of everyone wanting to, those who have morals, to address it. So it has in fact become more of a mixture now than it ever was, for different reasons. But it now, if you look at this room and the makeup of this audience, it has taken on a different scope. But I think the goals are still the same. Thank you.
Okay, this is a good time. If any of you three want to say anything back to each other, this is a good time to do it. Or we can just open it wide up and see if we have comments and questions, and I'll bring the mic out to folks. Any?
I wonder if different parts of the county, some of the little communities and Rosman, and what the experience there, if it differed from that in Brevard. and things were proceeded at a different kind of pace?
I can address it, and others can. When I was growing up, Rosamond was off limits. Even though my father and my uncle both worked, a couple of uncles, I guess Robert, worked at the tannery. Mm-hmm. And they had a tannery and a lumber mill in Brevard, and they had a tannery and a lumber mill in Rosamond. And black folks were allowed to work there. But Rosamond, and I don't say this because I have friends from Rosamond who live in Rosamond now, but then Rosamond, I guess, Nancy, you'd say the black folks, was the hub of segregation. It was a core of racism. My parents going to Florida, we used to go to Florida in the summer, and my mother would not stop in Rosamond. She would always make sure she had enough gas to get, as she called it, getting up the mountain. And she would not stop in Rosamond. Things have changed, you know, but in the early days, Rosamond was a core of segregation.
Well, see, I didn't see that part of Rosamond. My father would take us to Rosamond to visit people up there just about every Sunday, if he didn't go to Pisgah Forest. They were friends of his because his grandfather was raised up there. He was found, I think they said, when he was 12 years old, and a family of Owens took him in and raised him. And of course, my father knew a lot of people up there. So I didn't see that part of Rosamond. I used to love to go up there and sit on, I don't remember the lady's name, her porch and swing. And she'd give us, my brother and I, cake and cookies and stuff, you know. So I can't say that. When I knew that there was prejudice in Rosamond, I was a big girl in school. I'd say I was at least 13. So I can't say.
Well, I have to say that my experience with Rosamond, I took them at their word and stayed out there. I stayed away from it. Because when I worked in the, I guess, mid-60s, probably 63, 64, I worked at Olin for a while, and I worked with quite a few guys from Rosamond when I worked in the finishing department. And they would let it be known that they didn't care for black people in that area. It was a vocal conversation among them at lunchtime, et cetera, to make sure that you heard that they didn't appreciate black folk in Rosamond. So I took them at their word and stayed as far away from it as I could. I thought they were serious.
Yes, Arthur.
When we moved here some 22 years ago from, when we moved here from Florida some 22 years ago, I heard the expression when I worked for, volunteered at the Lake Toxaway Fire Department, that they'll tolerate newcomers, but we're not accepted. But I do have a question for you all. Why do you call yourselves black Africans when you were born here and you're black Americans?
I don't refer to myself, I refer to myself as African American. I don't refer to myself as black African. My family are African and Irish. I didn't get this complexion from from Nigeria. Okay. But I refer to myself as an African American the same way an Irish American or an Italian American. I don't look at it, I look at it from a cultural perspective. I was very much interested in learning about my culture. I was taught a lot about my culture. Our family did what, Robert, back in the 80s, they did a genealogy that took us back to the Bantu tribe of West Africa. For me, I can't speak for them, but you know, and then there's been some conversation about what black folks refer to themselves as. Some like to be called black, some like to be called African American, some like to be called one thing or the other. So, I am an African American. I am an American of African and Irish descent.
You know, we say that I'm an American because I don't know where my ancestors came from. They was lost in this area.
I accept African American because for so many years we adapted ourselves to names that were given us by white folk. If I pulled out my birth certificate, Nancy, and it said colored, you know, 1943 we were called colored. Later on we were Negroes, and there's some other names I care not to mention here now, but those were names that were given us by those who wanted to call us whatever. So I say I can identify with African American because I am of African descent. That is where my bloodline started. But I happened upon these grounds to be born in America, so I am an African American. And that's something that I choose.
What do you think are the biggest challenges for young people, let's say like high school age students who are black in Transylvania County now?
I think some of the challenges for young people of color are probably some of the same challenges as they are for white kids now. Economic challenges are probably at the forefront. For black kids, now it's even, I think, emphasis has been placed in the past and is still currently being placed on education. The challenge to acquire a good secondary education, the challenge to challenge the school system, to provide a quality education, but for across the board, our kids leave the community, and this, like I said, this is not just for black kids. This is across the board because there are the economic powers within the county now that existed in the past don't exist anymore. So we're literally losing our youth, both black and white, to after they graduate from high school, they're gone. But I would say academic challenges to keep our students focused, to keep our students, to make them aware that, you know, we were all brought up to believe that really what stood before integration was education. You know, we were all encouraged to get a good education. That was the key that could open a number of doors. So I would say educational challenges.
I think a lot of it acceptance. The children, the young people, they are accepted if they father's a mayor, or if their father's a doctor, or whatever, all the children should be accepted regardless of who they are or where they come from. And it's not that way, especially in the schools. They are not, all children are not recognized.
If we could get our young people to, piggybacking on what my brother said, get our young people to understand the importance of education and just how far education can take them. However, most of the times our kids that get an education, they leave Brevard and they never come back because there aren't any opportunities here. There's nothing for them to do. I could probably name 8 or 10 young people right now that left here, never came back because they got jobs and got offers in other places. I have 3 daughters. All of them are employed in other cities, Atlanta and Chattanooga, because the field that they are working in, they probably never would have found it. Well, they're in the healthcare field now, but they probably wouldn't have been able to find a job at the pay scales that they're making within Transylvania County. A lot of people would love to come back here and live, but to what? Yeah.
Some of the obvious issues of discrimination that you mentioned, like coming in the back door, not being able to drink out of a white water fountain and use bathrooms, those are gone today. But still, I know that people of color feel that issues of discrimination continue to exist in some form. So since some of those obvious ones are gone, what are issues of discrimination that people of color are feeling today? I know personally, when I look back when I was young, I never saw a black commentator on TV. Now I turn on the TV and there are several. And I thought, wow, you know, that's progress. But obviously that's only one issue of progress. What are issues of discrimination that black people face today?
When I returned to Brevard in 1984, I applied for a job with the city of Brevard. And submitted a resume, took 2 interviews, and was basically told that the position had been taken. I later, 4 years later, applied for the job again and got it. This was when the Brevard ABC board was coming into itself. Even though I had a management background, I took the position of a cashier. 2 years later, I was promoted to assistant manager. But as is today, I manage a facility for Habitat for Humanity. I am one of only 3 black retail store managers in Transylvania County. One at Ingalls, one at Dollar General, and myself. The challenges today are competitive, and you will find that it's very easy for the system to alter, and it's done really according to guidelines. I guess my brother would tell you back in the day at the plants, you know, the thing that the last hired, first fired scenario played out because they had a union seniority thing going. So how long did it take him to work his way up? Not because of the color of his skin, but because when he was hired and those that were in front of him. So you combat a system, a antiquated system that's in place, but you also combat the underlying thing that the people who are interviewing you know that they have options. And the options are carried out within the guidelines of employment, you know, within the guidelines of employment. But I would say that there's a misconception by white people. And the misconception is that everything is okay. With the NAACP, I'll put that hat on now, we tried to set up meetings with elected officials within the county, from city council, the mayor, county commissioners, and we received some interesting letters back from these folks. Some very interesting letters. And I had conversations, and I make no bones about it, because truth is truth. And a gentleman who I have a great deal of respect for, him and his family have known his family for many years, and they bring that to your attention, how long they've known you when you're engaged in conversation. This is kind of a putback strategy to let you know that they know you and they accommodate you. But Mayor Harris told me he was offended. He said, "You are offending the police department by requesting a meeting with the chief of police and the sheriffs, county commissioners, whose name I really won't give the respect of. Well, anyway, of saying. I mean, after he informed me that we were classmates and we graduated together, we attended classes together, we played ball together, he let me know. Then he told me I should be focused more on the crazy black man in New York who killed 2 policemen. And I said, okay. But these are some of the contents that come down. And so there's still an underlying aura of, you folks are okay. Why are you? And it was brought to my attention that we are being. See, many of you who sit under the sound of my voice are considered outsiders. You're considered outsiders. You are. You are considered outsiders. And we have been accused, and I say we, the NAACP, of being influenced by outsiders. Well, they heard that in Selma. They heard that in Mississippi. They heard that you folks are okay, you're being influenced by outsiders. So I kind of strayed away from your question, but
Just one thing about discrimination now. I'm a landlord, and I can't tell you how many times people come to try to rent an apartment from me and say, nobody else will rent to us because we're an interracial couple. I mean, that is extremely common in this county. Sometimes they say because we're black, but interracial couples definitely. It's a big problem and a big area of prejudice.
One of the things that I noticed, I guess, upon moving back to Brevard, I made my way through some of the government agencies, pay taxes, water bill, et cetera, et cetera. And I noticed a lack of people of color. I remember thinking years ago, why are my parents paying taxes and we have to go to school in Hendersonville? And I think, and to replay that tape now, when I go to town to pay my taxes, when I go to pay the water bill, when I take care of, I just bought my tag for my car here, and we have to pay just like any of the rest of you do. But why are there no people of color in any of those places? I just don't think that we are properly or fairly represented in a lot of the governmental agencies. The same question we asked recently even to the sheriff department and the police department is just how many people of color do they have in their departments? And we got equitable answers, but that is one of the areas that kind of jumped out at me when my wife, we were standing there one day when the trash man came by. Well, if you live in Atlanta, the city is overwhelmingly of color. You know, the mayor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she said, honey, they have white garbage collectors up here. You know, and I think that was the start of my kind of recognizing and seeing just what was going on. She said they have white garbage collectors because in Atlanta most of the time we see black folk hanging on the garbage trucks. Okay. But that is one area that really just kind of stood out to me.
Noreen and Michael, and then we're going to call this to a halt. They're going to have a time to have a closing comment. But Noreen?
I had a stroke, so I might be unclear. But
You're clear.
I was raised in California, and the prejudice was not only against black people, but Mexican American too. But my father told me that when it said we reserve the right to refuse service to anyone, they meant Mexican Americans and black people. And so my father said, we'll go and look, and if they says it on the menu, we're going to go with. We didn't eat a lot of places.
I'm sure.
Okay.
Tommy, you mentioned the letters that we wrote to some of the public officials.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to go on and advise those who don't know the group. We did in fact meet with the chief of police and the sheriff in a very cordial meeting that lasted for 2 or 3 hours, and I think all of us came away feeling that.
Oh, absolutely,
they
absolutely. It was absolutely the feedback. It was interesting, and these were the entities that we probably wanted to meet with initially, but they were totally 360 from the elected officials. It was an amazing dialogue with both the chief of police and the sheriff. I think that brings a point across that once you are able to sit down at the table together, and Martin Luther King said this, once you're able to sit down and break bread together, sit down at the table and are able to open dialogue, open, honest dialogue, it's one of the most positive things you can do. But you got to get to the table. You got to get to the table.
And can I just say also, I was part of that meeting. A number of us were part of this meeting with Phil Harris and Dave Mahoney, and one of the things I think we all were saying, and including the two officials, was that we've got to, it does need to be named. We do need to talk about being black, being white, being brown, about our differences. Whatever those differences may be, we need to be able to name them and then dialogue about them and try to be honest about them and have conversations like this and not pretend that it doesn't matter. I think it's sort of in fashion now to say, oh, it doesn't make any difference, we're all the same. Well, yes and no. In the real world, we really aren't always starting from the same place with the same issues. And I think that came across very strongly in that meeting with the sheriff and the police chief. Would any of you or all of you like to say anything in closing? We said we'd keep this down to about an hour, and that's where we are now, but this has been a rich presentation. Anything else?
I'd say in closing that forums like this, and not just addressing being black in Transylvania County or Brevard, but being in Transylvania County and Brevard, can open so much dialogue, can open so much up to the general public. I think events like this should take place more, involving our elected officials, involving our clergy. The old adage, which still holds true, one of the most segregated days of the week is Sunday. And to open up, but we're Christians. And also Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims. I think bringing open, honest dialogue to the table, and we've just gone through a political cycle, an election cycle, that I think has really brought to the forefront, I don't care which side of the table you're on, conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, independent. I really don't care much about that. But it's opened up a lot of how we as citizens, as a collective body within the community, black, white, brown, really need to start addressing issues. Because if you don't, the echoes of the 50s and 60s may return to us. If we're not real careful. And when I say return to us, I mean to all of us. Mm-hmm. Yes.
You want to have anything to add, Nancy? Robert?
We have not arrived in a post-racist society yet. We have not arrived in a post-racist society yet. We will not arrive until we come to the table of reconciliation. It is of the utmost necessity that we do not hold back how we feel, do not hold back what we think, because the time has come when we live in such a racially mixed society that it is necessary for us to have open dialogue. And that dialogue is where the healing is going to come from. And I think most of us sitting here tonight would accept the fact that a healing is needed. A homeless man was just shot on the streets of California. It's still happening, folks. And if we can't have some kind of open dialogue with each other and have an honest dialogue, it will continue. Thank you.
Thank you.